Hey guys, some people have asked me about the breakdown video of my render and how I set up the locks. So today I'll just quickly show you how the pieces work together, and we'll do a quick tutorial together on how to make these individual locks. So for creating the hair, I use Xgen Legacy and using modifiers and guides to drive the main shapes, and I eventually convert them to interactive groom so that I could do more final edits with it. So the hair is actually just made up of 4 parts to it. So we have the main base hair. This is just so that it helps me with getting the transition from the scalp all the way to these individual braids, as you can see. And next we've got the bun, the back. Then finally we have a bit of transitional hair, which in hindsight I should have made a little bit longer, a little bit sparse for now, but that's alright. So for now I will hide the descriptions and have a look at the curves that I've backed out from using the guides in these descriptions. You can see how they're constructed. It's fairly straightforward. You just need to sort of look at your references and then decide how you would layer these hair strands. I realize the construction of it is not entirely realistic, but since the render is going to be seen from afar, we could get away with a lot, and we sort of just intentionally build out the shape. For now I will hide the guides and I'll use a pre-prepared example just to go over what sort of modifiers you need and what kind of settings you need to have for your Xgen. So we're not going to start making them just yet. Let's jump into Xgen and have a look. I have a prepared example which is very simple. I've got 2 guides on the scalp mesh, and let me just set the modifier to the density to 5. These locks really just need, I would say, 4 main modifiers to make them work, and those are clumping. You need coil, cut, and noise, and we'll talk about layering the effect later on. But for now, let me just quickly show you the concepts of the basic concept of how to get this effect going. So first, obviously, you need to use these guides as clumping, as your clumping method, and you sort of need you need them to be very tight. So this little effect, the end, that's optional. You can do that, but it's not entirely realistic for our character. So I'll just turn them back for now. So once the hair is clumped, we need to make them coil around the guides, and it'll look something like this. So I've set the counts very high. We'll talk about the numbers later on, but for now, if I zoom in very close, you can see the hairs are indeed coiling around the guides. Then the cut modifier is just there to introduce some length differences, and finally we will layer on noise effect to create these tiny flyaways, dried out individual strands of hair. So that's basically it. Let me just put away the example for now so we can work from scratch. So I will hide both of these, and to get Xgen started you need to have a UV'd mesh with a Lambert shader. We can just click on it, hit generate, create description. You want to have a good naming convention, just in case. Always have a good naming convention. So hair collection, locks description, that sounds good. We're going to choose placing and shaping guides for this one. Great. Now sometimes if there's an error, just make sure you set your project, and that should more often than not fix your thing. And remember, everything has to be to scale. If you have the incorrect scale, sometimes there are problems. So we could just quickly plant down 2 strands, and I'm gonna go in, get these guides, we're gonna scale them up. You can obviously shape them into anything you like, and in the beginning you'll realize that these default guides don't really have all that many segments. What is that? I think 5 segments or something. In depending on your character, sometimes it's much better to keep the segments low, but in our case, if we're creating much longer hair, we definitely need more segments, just so that it could be, you know, have the correct shape. So what I'm going to do now is, with these guides selected, if you've scaled them up, in general you want to rebuild them, but just be careful. So currently I think there are 5 segments. We're just going to increase that to 10 so we can have more organic shapes. So now you can see there's a lot more control vertices. So I'm not going to worry too much about this. You should obviously sculpt your own. The idea of this tutorial is so that you can make any hairstyles you want with it. You know, any hairstyle with locks, that is. So if I hit preview now, you should see some strands being simulated. At first glance we'll see that it's obviously a bit too thick, so let's fix the width for now. Do a little fall off like that. I like to keep modifier CV count to roughly 20 for preview purposes. We're going to have to change that number later on once we start using modifiers. The width is a bit too thick for now. Let's try 0.2. A little bit too thin. Let's try 0.6. Right, that's manageable. If you're having trouble seeing the hair, you can turn down the specular reflections on the shader. So yeah, just click on the description, go into the attributes, and then you can find hair physical shader that you have assigned it, the ones that come default with it. I like to just turn down the color a little bit and then turn off the highlights completely. Alright, now as an additional step, do this at your own risk. If you have a good computer, what you could do is go into viewport and head all the way down to anti-aliasing. If you multi-sample this, the hairs would come out a little bit smoother, but in my case it really does tank my performance when I have a whole strand of hair. Okay, so first we're going to need a clumping modifier. I'm just going to go into the modifier tab, zoom in a little bit. I'm going to click on clumping, and in the setup maps, because I've already done this before, that's why it knows what to do, but if you're just doing it for the first time, you want to click on guide, the guides that you've placed, and hit save. Okay, we need the overall clump shape to look like so. So the braids, the locks would start being twisted early, close to the root, and then we're going to need a secondary fall off over here, and then from there on we're just going to keep it even. Okay. To drive all my modifiers, I like to use an expression. You could just copy what I type down here, and I'll put a link in the description to a page where you can find other useful expressions. So here's the expression when completed. I will put this in the description again so you can just grab them. What it essentially does is that it allows a percentage based control for this modifier. So if I just tune it down, you'll start to see more hair strands stopping to follow this modifier. Put it back to 100 for now. I'm going to mess with the adjust the width a little bit more, and we're going to volumize the clump, and we're going to go down to copy effect, put 0.1 for this. You can experiment with these values based on your hair, and maybe 0.5 for the offset, so that it deviates a little bit from the guides. Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and untick volumize because it's doing something weird. That looks about right for now. Next we need a secondary clump, a general clump that isn't following along this guide, just so that we can have a clump within a clump. So clumping, and for this one you can just, I think I'll set it to 2, density 2, and then you can just generate these clumps. There we go. It takes a while, and there we have it. We start seeing a much higher frequency clumping. So we can just play with the values a little bit. It needs to be quite obvious, right? And once again, for the mask, we like to use that as the expression. For the secondary clump, I'll say, let's say about 85% of them would follow this clumping, and there we have it. Next, we're going to need a a coil modifier, so that the strands start to coil around the guide. And once again, in mask, we're going to put in the expression we had set earlier on. I'm going to keep that to 100 for now. For the locks, we're going to need it to coil quite a lot, so I'm going to up the count to maybe 110. And since there's too much coiling happening, we're going to need a lot more control vertices to compensate. Let's say maybe match it for now. Doesn't seem right, so again you need to experiment, because you're likely going to have multiple strands at different lengths, so just play with the numbers until you find something that's satisfactory. For me, I think 210 should be fine. We're going to mess with the count scale a little bit, like so. And radius is how far out from from the center of the if you imagine there's a cylinder, how far out from the center of the cylinder is the with the locks be. So essentially the sort of like the radius of it, hence radius. I'm going to keep that to maybe 0.8 or 0.6, and we're going to keep the radius larger near the tip, maybe like so, because this seems very painful. So we're gonna keep it maybe 0.5, like that. Right, now that's with the coiling done, and we're gonna add a pretty straightforward modifier called cut. Let me set that to maybe 0.4. And once again, we're going to use a percentage-based expression to drive this effect. Let's say maybe 15% of the hair will be cut. Okay. Finally, we're going to need a couple of noise modifiers to add a bit of randomness. So let's go ahead and add noise. For this, we'll drive the effect with an expression for about maybe 75%. I like to untick the other effects just so I can see the noise a little bit better. The frequency will be a bit higher because the hairs are essentially sort of twisted around, so we're going to need it to take effect even with the coil on. So the frequency would be maybe about 10 or so, and I like to keep the magnitude maybe 1.8, a little bit strong, 0.6. I'll mess with the curves, so it's going to start getting noisy as soon as it's being twisted. So it's maybe about maybe 30% at the root, and then it just becomes noisy towards the tip. I like to set correlation to 0.2. So that seems a little bit strong, so let me dial it back a little bit. Right, so that's already quite noisy. Let's see how it looks with the coil. Okay. Essentially what you can do is then just duplicate these noises. For this example, I'll just use 3 layers of noise. And each noise upwards, we're going to increase the magnitude a little bit, maybe 2.2. And let's say 35% of the strands would have this effect. You can obviously customize at this point, just do it to your heart's content based on your references. I'm just going to do this quite quickly as an example. So for noise 3, these are the large flyaways, I would say. So let's keep the frequency at 10 maybe. Frequency at 10, magnitude around 3. So let's see. Okay, I like to go a little bit further than that. Okay, 5%. So that's still a bit too fuzzy. Maybe I'll drop that to 3%. And then let's up the density to have a preview. We can see now just behind the light sources it's quite thin, but obviously if you want to check, you're going to have to render it completely. But this looks fine to me for now. Let's talk about rendering the hair quickly. I'm going to use Arnold to render this scene. For now, I think I will turn off the viewport anti-aliasing just so that it runs a bit faster. Okay, now I'm going to assign it a shader, and if you're not familiar, Arnold has a standard hair shader which is quite good out of the box. I'm just going to click on the description. We're going to right click, assign a new material, go to Arnold. I've already got hair in the filter, but if you click onto Arnold, you'll see the hair is somewhere around here. Standard hair, yes. Right, you could do this in hyper shader, whatever. You could do a lot of things with the hair. You can have do grey hairs, you can do dyes, but we're not going to do anything fancy yet. For now, we're just going to keep it to, let's say, maybe an African hair. I say that because there's some tweakings that you have to do. If you want the locks to be a bit dry, a bit old, you can mess with the roughness, but I'm just going to leave it at 0.2 for now. And shift, yes, maybe 2.9 for African hair. I'll put links. I'll put a link in the description to the Arnold documentation. There you'll find different values for different races of hair. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and render this out. Currently the scene is lit up with a skydome light. You can use any light as long as you can see the hair. So if you do a quick render, I've already clicked on it and some monstrosity happened. But if you render it for the first time, so let me just see the film gate easily. Alright, there we go. If you just hit render, you'll see that the hair is not really following the guides, so it's just flown off. We need to go back to Xgen, and in your preview output, you just want to respawn the hair essentially. So now render is set to none. We're going to remove the hair and then regenerate the groom with Arnold Renderer. And there we have it. This should fix the problem. And there we go. Let me do a close-up render so you could see. Okay, so I've gone ahead and adjusted the lighting and rendered out a close-up, and hopefully it catches a bit of the specular highlights. But as you can see, this is how I would go about making some dreadlocks, and right off the bat, I feel like it looks good for now, but there's definitely a lot of room for adjustments, and this is where you can, be free to experiment. If I were to redo this, maybe I'll just adjust the coiling a bit more and reduce the overall noise affected. Right now it's a little bit too fuzzy, but the way to construct it is, it's quite free, and there are many other ways of doing this. So I hope this helped you, and if you'd like to see more content like this, I'd be happy to make them. I know that learning all these myself has been quite difficult because of limited resources, but at the same time, often the best tutorials I've come across are free. That's it. Thank you guys.